Everyone in Carl Williams's empire knew one truth: nobody could tame Caesar, the Mafia boss's 450-pound African lion that had mauled 3 handlers, shredded a steel cage door, and once dragged a grown man across the marble floor like a rag doll. Even Carl himself couldn't control the beast he called his pet. So when a yellow school bus hissed to a stop on Maple Street, and a tiny black 7-year-old girl in a floral dress stepped onto the sidewalk, every man on Carl's payroll braced for a death they couldn't prevent. Caesar's roar shook windows. Carl yanked the leash so hard it split his palms. His enforcer drew his gun. Mothers screamed for the child to run. But the little girl didn't flinch. She tilted her head, looked into the lion's golden eyes as if she recognized him, and whispered something no one could hear. Caesar stopped mid-roar. His body trembled. And then, in a moment that made a killer stumble backward in shock, the most feared lion in organized crime lowered himself to the pavement, crawled toward the child, and pressed his muzzle into her small hand. The beast was purring. Carl stood frozen, blood dripping from his palms. He'd watched empires fall. He'd seen men beg for their lives. But never once had Caesar obeyed anyone. And the lion hadn't just obeyed her. He'd gone to her, like he'd been waiting for her. Before I tell you what she whispered, a secret that would break Carl more than any bullet, hit like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Trust me, you need to hear this. What she said turned his blood cold. I knew you'd remember me, Sonny. Carl's world tilted. Sonny. The lion's name was Caesar, always had been. So how did this child know a name that didn't exist? The answer would drag him into a past darker than his own, and reveal a truth about his beast that no one ever knew. Stay with me. This will change everything you think you know about monsters. Carl Williams had built his empire on violence, silence, and fear. His name made judges rethink verdicts. His calls ended careers. Crossing him meant disappearing. But Caesar? Even Carl couldn't control him. The lion arrived 2 years earlier, a gift from an associate who dealt in exotic animals. The moment the sedation wore off, Caesar killed his first handler, mauled the second a week later. After the third incident, Carl stopped replacing them. Trainers called him untrainable. His own men called him a demon. But Carl kept him, because nothing made men fear him more than owning something even he couldn't control. Today, Carl walked Caesar through Maple Street to intimidate a debtor. He didn't expect the school bus. He didn't expect the little girl, and he never could have predicted that his bloodthirsty lion had been waiting for her all along. Carl Williams didn't believe in God. He believed in fear. Fear had built his empire from nothing. Fear kept politicians in his pocket, judges on his payroll, and rivals in early graves. For 23 years, Carl had ruled the eastern seaboard's underworld with an iron grip that never loosened and a reputation that never softened. Men didn't respect him. They dreaded him. And Carl preferred it that way. His mansion sat on 12 acres of private land, surrounded by walls topped with cameras and guards who shot first and never asked questions. Inside, marble floors gleamed under chandeliers that cost more than most people's homes. Priceless art hung on walls that had witnessed confessions extracted through methods no court would ever hear about. But the crown jewel of Carl's kingdom wasn't the mansion. It wasn't the fleet of black SUVs or the vault beneath his office floor. It was Caesar. The lion lived in a custom-built enclosure behind the East Wing, 5,000 square feet of reinforced concrete, steel bars thicker than a man's wrist, and a feeding system designed so no human ever had to step inside. Carl had learned that lesson the hard way. 3 handlers, 3 funerals. After the third one, he stopped counting the cost and started appreciating the message. Nothing said power like owning a predator that couldn't be controlled. Carl's men, hardened killers who had done things that would make most people vomit, refused to go near the enclosure. They'd watch Caesar pace behind the bars, golden eyes tracking them like prey, and find urgent business elsewhere. Even Marco, Carl's most trusted enforcer, a man who had once strangled a rival with piano wire without blinking, crossed himself whenever he passed the East Wing. The household staff worked in rotations specifically designed to minimize time near Caesar's territory. Maids cleaned with the doors locked. Cooks prepared meals with one eye on the window. Everyone moved faster on that side of the mansion. Conversations dropped to whispers, and nobody lingered after dark. Carl loved it. He'd stand on his balcony some nights, glass of bourbon in hand, watching Caesar prowl in the moonlight. 450 pounds of muscle, claw, and fang, a perfect killing machine that answered to no one. Politicians could be bought, judges could be threatened, enemies could be buried. But Caesar? Caesar couldn't be negotiated with, couldn't be reasoned with, couldn't be tamed. And that made him the purest symbol of Carl's philosophy. In this world, the most dangerous creature wins. Carl had bought Caesar to project power, to remind everyone, including himself, that he was untouchable. What he didn't know was that the lion carried a secret, a memory buried so deep that even years of violence and captivity couldn't erase it. The memory of a little girl who once called him by a different name. But that truth was still coming. Walking toward him on small feet, stepping off a yellow school bus, wearing a colorful dress and carrying a rainbow backpack. The call came on a Tuesday morning. A man named Gerald Patterson, mid-level accountant, gambling problem, 3 weeks late on a $50,000 payment, had stopped answering his phone. Carl didn't like being ignored. Most days he would have sent Marco, a broken kneecap, a few missing teeth, and Gerald would remember his manners. Simple, efficient, forgettable. But Carl was in a different mood today. He wanted to send a message that Gerald would carry for the rest of his miserable life. A memory that would wake him up at 3 a.m. in cold sweats for years to come. He wanted to take Caesar for a walk. His men thought he was joking. When they realized he wasn't, 3 of them called in sick. The rest drew straws for who would drive the lead SUV. Nobody wanted to be close when the leash snapped, and everyone knew it was a matter of when, not if. The reinforced leather lead had been custom-made by a company that supplied equipment for circus elephants. It was 3 inches thick, bolted to a steel chain, and rated to hold 2,000 pounds of force. Caesar tested it the moment they stepped outside. The lion lunged against the restraint, nearly pulling Carl off his feet. 450 pounds of raw predator, muscles rippling beneath golden fur, claws scraping concrete. Carl dug his heels in and yanked back hard. For a moment, man and beast locked in a silent war of dominance. Caesar growled, a sound that vibrated through Carl's chest like thunder. But he settled. Barely. They walked. Maple Street was 15 minutes from the mansion, a quiet suburban stretch where nothing exciting ever happened. Brick houses with neat lawns, minivans in driveways, the American dream wrapped in white picket fences. Carl strolled down the sidewalk like he owned it, because today, he did. Behind him, 2 black SUVs crawled at walking pace, windows tinted, engines humming. His men watched from inside, fingers near triggers, ready for the moment everything went wrong. Caesar's roar echoed off the houses. Curtains twitched. A woman watering her garden dropped her hose and ran inside. A man loading groceries froze mid-step, car keys slipping from his fingers. Carl smiled. This was power. Not the money, not the mansion. This, the look in their eyes, the way they scattered like mice. This was what he lived for. Gerald Patterson's house sat at the end of the block. Number 47. Blue shutters. A child's bicycle on the porch. Carl stopped on the sidewalk directly across the street. He didn't need to knock, didn't need to say a word. He just stood there, lion straining at the leash, and waited. A curtain moved in the upstairs window. A pale face appeared. Gerald. Carl raised his hand in a slow, mocking wave. The face disappeared. Message received. Carl turned to leave, satisfied. The debt would be paid by morning. It always was. But he didn't see the yellow school bus rounding the corner behind him. The screech of brakes cut through the quiet street. Carl turned. A yellow school bus had rounded the corner and was slowing to a stop less than 40 feet away. The red stop sign on its side swung out. Lights flashed. Marco's voice crackled through Carl's earpiece. "Boss, we need to move, now!" Carl didn't move. "Boss, I heard you!" The bus doors hissed open. Carl could see the driver's face through the windshield, a heavyset woman with glasses, frozen in horror, staring at the lion like she was watching a nightmare step into daylight. Marco's SUV pulled closer. The window rolled down. "Carl, there's kids on that bus. We gotta go." Carl's jaw tightened. His fingers wrapped tighter around the leash. Caesar was growling now, low and steady, his golden eyes fixed on the bus doors. Move aside? For a school bus? The thought made Carl's blood hot. He had never stepped aside for anyone. Not for cops, not for rivals, not for the FBI when they came knocking with warrants and false confidence. The world bent to Carl Williams, not the other way around. "We stay," he said. The first child stepped off the bus. A boy, maybe 8, Batman backpack hanging from one shoulder. He looked up, saw the lion, and his face went white. For 1 second he stood paralyzed. Then he screamed, a high piercing shriek, and bolted across the nearest lawn. That scream broke the dam. Children poured off the bus in a flood of panic, crying, shouting, shoving each other aside. They scattered in every direction, behind cars, into yards, up porch steps. Mothers appeared in doorways, snatching their kids inside. A father sprinted across his lawn and tackled his daughter behind a hedge. Caesar lunged. The leash snapped taut. Carl planted his feet, teeth gritted, arms burning as 450 pounds of predator strained toward the chaos. The lion's roar ripped through the street, so loud it rattled mailboxes. And then Carl saw her. A little girl, still standing on the bus steps, not running, not screaming, not even flinching. She was small, 7 maybe, with brown skin, braided hair pulled into a ponytail, and a bright floral dress splashed with pink and yellow and turquoise. A rainbow backpack hung from her tiny shoulders. White sneakers, little silver earrings catching the afternoon sun. She stepped off the bus. 1 step, then another. Her eyes weren't on Carl, weren't on the SUVs or the screaming children or the terrified parents. She was looking at Caesar. And she was walking toward him. Carl's stomach dropped. "Hey, hey, get back!" The girl didn't stop, didn't even glance at him. Caesar had gone still. His growl faded. His massive head tilted, ears twitching forward, nostrils flaring. The girl stopped 10 feet away. Her face held no fear, no panic, just something that looked almost like recognition. She tilted her head to match the lion's, and she smiled. Something snapped inside Caesar. Maybe it was the screaming, maybe it was the chaos, small bodies scattering like prey across open ground. Maybe it was instinct, buried deep in 400 pounds of muscle and fang, awakening after years in a cage. Whatever it was, Carl felt it before he saw it. The leash went tight. Then tighter. Then the lion exploded forward. Caesar launched himself toward the fleeing children with a force that nearly ripped Carl's arms from their sockets. The leather bit into his palms, shredding skin. Blood bloomed across his fingers. His dress shoes scraped against concrete as the lion dragged him forward like he weighed nothing. "Caesar, stop!" The lion didn't hear him, didn't care. His roar split the air, a sound so primal, so terrifying, that even the parents froze mid-rescue. This wasn't a growl. This was a hunting call, the announcement of a kill. Carl's men spilled from the SUVs, guns drawn, shouting commands that disappeared into the chaos. but nobody had a clear shot. Too many children. Too much movement. One stray bullet, and they'd be explaining a dead kid to the feds. Carl dug his heels in and pulled with everything he had. His shoulders screamed, his back spasmed. The leash sliced deeper into his palms, and he could feel warm blood running down his wrists. It wasn't enough. Caesar was stronger. Caesar was faster. And Caesar smelled fear in the air like perfume. Then Carl saw her again. The girl in the floral dress, still standing in the middle of the sidewalk, directly in the lion's path. She hadn't run, hadn't screamed, hadn't moved an inch. She was walking forward. "No!" Carl's voice cracked. "Run! Get out of the way!" The girl didn't listen. Her small white sneakers moved steadily across the concrete, step by step, closing the distance between herself and 450 pounds of charging death. Caesar was 15 feet away. Then 12? Then 10? Carl's heart stopped. This was it. He was about to watch a child die, right here on this quiet suburban street, torn apart by his own beast while cameras in every window recorded his empire's end. But then, impossibly, Caesar slowed. His charge broke. His muscles tensed in a different way. Confusion rippled through his massive frame. The girl stopped. 10 feet away. Close enough to smell the blood on Carl's hands. Close enough to feel the heat radiating off the lion's golden fur. She tilted her head. Slowly. Gently. Like she was greeting an old friend. Caesar's growl faded to silence. And in a voice so soft that Carl almost missed it, a voice that carried no fear, no hesitation, only quiet certainty, the little girl spoke. "I know you." 3 words, the lion froze, and Carl Williams, who had never believed in anything he couldn't buy, threaten, or kill, felt something cold crawl down his spine. The world stopped. Carl couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but watch as his untamable monster stood frozen before a 7-year-old girl in a floral dress. Caesar's roar had died mid-throat. His lips, pulled back over fangs that had torn through grown men, slowly relaxed. His massive body, coiled for the kill just seconds ago, began to tremble. But this wasn't rage. Carl knew rage. He'd seen Caesar in the grip of fury more times than he could count. This was something else. The lion's golden eyes were locked on the girl's face, searching, scanning, his nostrils flared wide, pulling in her scent like he was trying to find something buried deep in his memory. Amory didn't move, didn't speak. She just stood there, calm as still water, watching him right back. Then, slowly, she raised her hand. Carl's heart slammed against his ribs. "Don't," but the word died on his lips. Amory's small hand extended toward the lion. Palm up, fingers relaxed, no trembling, no hesitation, like she'd done this 1,000 times before. Caesar's ears flattened. A sound escaped his throat, not a growl, not a roar, but something Carl had never heard from him. Something that sounded almost like a whimper. The lion lowered his head. 450 pounds of apex predator, the beast that had killed handlers and terrorized an empire, bowed before a child. His massive skull dropped until his nose hovered inches above her tiny palm. His nostrils flared again, one long, deep inhale, and his whole body shuddered. Then, impossibly, Caesar closed his eyes and pressed his muzzle into her hand. The street went silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silence that follows a miracle or a catastrophe, when reality bends so far that no one knows whether to scream or pray. Carl stood frozen, blood still dripping from his shredded palms, watching his monster nuzzle against a little girl's fingers like a kitten seeking warmth. The leash hung slack. Forgotten. Behind him, Marco had his gun raised, but his hands were shaking. The other men stood like statues, mouths open, trying to process what their eyes were telling them. Neighbors had emerged onto porches. Phones were raised, recording. Children peeked out from behind hedges and parked cars, too stunned to cry anymore. And in the middle of it all, Amery Nelson stood with her hand pressed against the lion's face, her small fingers stroking the fur beneath his eye. A tear rolled down Caesar's muzzle. Carl blinked. No, that wasn't possible. Lions didn't cry, animals didn't. But there it was, a single wet streak, cutting through golden fur. Amery leaned closer. Her lips moved, whispering something meant only for the lion's ears. Caesar's massive body sank to the pavement. He pressed his head against her chest and went still. The most dangerous creature Carl had ever owned was crying in the arms of a child. And Carl had no idea why. Amery knelt on the hot pavement like she belonged there. Her floral dress pooled around her small knees. Her rainbow backpack slipped off one shoulder and landed beside her with a soft thump. She didn't notice, didn't care. Her entire world had narrowed to the massive creature pressing against her chest. Her fingers moved through Caesar's mane. Slow, gentle strokes through the thick golden fur. She whispered as she petted him. Soft words, secret words. A private conversation between a little girl and a lion that no one else could hear. Caesar's eyes had closed. His enormous body rose and fell with deep, steady breaths. And from somewhere inside that barrel chest came a sound that made Carl's mind short-circuit. Purring. The lion was purring. Not growling, not rumbling a warning. Purring, like a house cat curled up in a sunbeam, drunk on warmth and safety, and something that looked terrifyingly like love. Carl stood 10 feet away, legs locked, brain refusing to process what his eyes were showing him. Blood dripped from his torn palms onto the concrete. The leash dangled from his frozen fingers, completely forgotten. 23 years he'd built his empire. 23 years of controlling everything and everyone around him. Judges, politicians, killers. He'd bent the world to his will through money and threats and calculated violence. But this he couldn't explain, couldn't control, couldn't even comprehend. Behind him, Marco still had his gun raised. But the barrel wavered, dipping toward the ground. There was nothing to shoot, no threat to neutralize, just a little girl hugging a monster who had chosen, for the first time in his violent life, to be gentle. "Boss," Marco's voice cracked. "What the hell is happening?" Carl didn't answer. He didn't have words. Doors creaked open up and down Maple Street. Neighbors stepped onto porches, phones raised, filming the impossible. The footage would go viral within hours. Carl knew that, knew his face would be everywhere, his lion exposed, his reputation shattered in ways he couldn't yet calculate. He didn't care, because the only thing he could focus on was the way Caesar, his weapon, his statement, his unchained god of violence, had melted beneath the hands of a 7-year-old girl like butter in summer heat. The children who had scattered were creeping back now, peeking around cars and hedges, watching with wide eyes. Parents held them close but couldn't look away either. Amery lifted her head. Her cheek was wet. Whether from her own tears or the lion's, Carl couldn't tell. She looked at Caesar with an expression that didn't belong on a child's face. It was the look of someone who had finally found something they'd lost. "I missed you," she whispered, just loud enough for Carl to hear. Caesar pressed closer, a low rumble vibrating through his body. And Carl Williams, who had never felt powerless in his entire adult life, realized he was watching something that defied everything he believed. A little girl had just done what no man alive ever could. Carl's mind wouldn't stop spinning. This wasn't natural, wasn't possible. Lions didn't bow to children. Killers didn't purr. 3 years he'd owned Caesar, and in that time the beast had sent 5 men to hospitals and 2 to morgues. Professional handlers, trained experts, grown men who knew what they were doing. And now a 7-year-old girl in a floral dress had walked up and tamed him in 30 seconds. No, something was wrong here. Something he didn't understand. And Carl Williams didn't survive 23 years in this business by accepting things he didn't understand. He moved before he could stop himself. 3 steps forward. His bloody hands reached out and gripped Amarie's small shoulders, firmly but not hard. He wasn't a complete monster. He had lines. Somewhere. "Hey." His voice came out rougher than he intended. "Hey, look at me." Amarie's head turned slowly. Her hand stayed on Caesar's mane, fingers still stroking, still soothing. The lion's eyes opened, a flash of gold, a flicker of warning. But he didn't move, didn't growl, just watched. Carl's throat tightened. Even now, even with his hands on the girl, Caesar stayed calm, like she was the one holding his leash. "Who are you?" Carl demanded. "How do you know my lion?" Amarie blinked. Her eyes were brown and deep, and filled with something that made Carl's chest ache in a way he didn't recognize. Not fear, not confusion. Sadness, old sadness, the kind that didn't belong on a child's face. "Answer me." Carl's grip tightened slightly. "Who are you? How did you do that?" Amarie's lower lip trembled. Not from fear of him. Carl could tell the difference. This was something else. Something broken, rising to the surface. "He's not yours," she said. The words hit Carl like a slap. "What?" "He's not yours." Her voice was quiet but steady. Certain. "He was mine first, before they took him away." Carl's hands dropped from her shoulders. His legs felt weak. The blood draining from his face left him cold despite the afternoon heat. "That's impossible," he heard himself say. "I bought him 2 years ago, from overseas. He came from—" "A circus." Amarie's eyes glistened. "A bad place, with bad people who hurt him, who made him mean." Carl's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "I used to visit him at night," she continued, her small voice carrying weight far beyond her years. "When everyone was sleeping, I brought him food, I sang to him, I told him stories so he wouldn't be scared." Her hand stroked Caesar's mane again. The lion pressed into her touch, eyes closing. "I named him Sonny," she whispered, "because I wanted him to feel warm." Carl staggered back a step. His mind was screaming that this was impossible, that a 7-year-old couldn't have known his lion before he did, that none of this made sense. But Caesar was still purring, and the little girl was crying, and somewhere deep in Carl's frozen heart, a crack began to form. Carl made the call before he reached the mansion. By midnight, he had everything. His contacts didn't ask questions. They never did. When Carl Williams wanted information, people delivered. Quickly, completely, and without curiosity about why. Bank records, shipping manifests, immigration documents, veterinary files. Everything about Caesar's life before he'd arrived in that steel crate 2 years ago. Carl spread the files across his desk and started reading. The lion had been born in captivity. A breeding facility in Eastern Europe that supplied animals to circuses, private collectors, and worse. At 8 weeks old, he'd been sold to a traveling show called Miracolo Brothers Circus, an outfit that operated outside the law, moving from country to country, staying one step ahead of regulators and animal rights investigators. The photographs made Carl's stomach turn. Caesar, younger, thinner, his mane just beginning to grow, chained to a concrete floor, whip marks across his back, ribs visible through dull, matted fur. His eyes, even then, held that same rage Carl had seen every day for 2 years. But now he understood where it came from. The circus had beaten him, starved him, forced him to perform under the crack of a whip and the threat of worse. When he refused, they withheld food for days. When he fought back, they used electric prods until he collapsed. Carl had done terrible things in his life. He knew cruelty. But this was different. This was systematic, relentless, the kind of abuse designed to break a creature completely. He kept reading. The circus had operated in the United States for 3 consecutive summers, setting up in rural areas where oversight was thin. One location kept appearing in the files. A small town in Georgia. Population 12,000. Notable only for one thing: a foster home. 12 children. State-funded. Located less than half a mile from where the circus pitched its tents. Carl's hands trembled as he turned the page. A complaint, filed by the circus owner himself. Dated 4 years ago. Ongoing trespassing issue. A young black female, approximately 4 to 5 years old, repeatedly breaking into the animal tent after hours. Found sleeping beside the lion enclosure on multiple occasions. Suspect she is from the nearby foster facility. Requests immediate intervention. Carl read it again. Then again. A 4-year-old girl. Sneaking into a circus tent at night, bringing scraps of food to a caged, starving lion. Sleeping beside his cage in the dark. Not because anyone told her to. Not because she had to. Because she wanted him to feel less alone. Carl closed his eyes. His chest hurt in a way that had nothing to do with his still bleeding palms. Amarie had been 4 years old. Alone in the world. Unwanted. Bounced from home to home with no one who cared whether she lived or died. And she'd spent her nights comforting a monster. The same monster who remembered her 3 years later. Carl picked up his phone. He needed to visit that foster home. The foster home looked exactly like Carl expected. Peeling paint, overgrown lawn, a swing set rusting in the backyard. 12 kids and not enough love to go around. The director, a tired woman named Mrs. Patterson, didn't ask why a man in a blood-stained suit wanted information about Amarie Nelson. She just handed over the file and accepted the envelope of cash Carl left on her desk. He read it in his car. Amarie had been abandoned at 3 days old, left in a hospital bathroom wrapped in a gas station towel. No note, no name, nothing but a tiny body and lungs strong enough to scream until someone found her. She'd been in the system ever since. 7 placements in 7 years, returned every time. Too quiet, they said. Too strange. She talked to animals instead of people. She wandered off at night. She didn't fit. Nobody wanted her. Carl turned the page. 4 years ago, the circus came to town, set up half a mile from the foster home. Amarie was 4, small for her age, invisible in a house full of forgotten children. She started sneaking out after dark. The file contained notes from her caseworker. Amarie had been found multiple times inside the circus tent, curled up beside a lion's cage. She'd stolen food from the kitchen, bread, fruit, scraps of meat, and fed it through the bars. She'd whispered to the animal for hours, sang him songs, told him he was beautiful. She called him Sonny. When the circus left that September, Amarie stopped eating, stopped talking, cried herself to sleep every night for weeks. The caseworker noted profound attachment to animal and recommended therapy the foster home couldn't afford. Carl closed the file. 3 years. 3 years that little girl had carried the memory of a starving lion she'd tried to save. 3 years she'd wondered where he went, whether he was okay, whether anyone was being kind to him. And then, on an ordinary Tuesday, a school bus dropped her on Maple Street, right in front of the monster she'd never forgotten. Carl sat in silence for a long time. He thought about Caesar, not as a weapon, but as a broken creature made vicious by cruelty. A beast who'd known only pain until a 4-year-old girl showed him something else. And he thought about himself. 53 years old. More money than he could spend. More blood on his hands than he could wash. An empire built on fear. And nobody, not one person in his entire life, had ever loved him the way that little girl loved a starving lion. Carl made a decision. 6 months later, Amarie Nelson was adopted. Her new home sat on 12 acres, had a custom-built enclosure in the backyard, and a lion named Sunny who slept outside her bedroom door every single night. Carl Williams never did explain why. Some things don't need explaining. Love remembers.